Hi folks, and welcome back to Screaming London. Today we have 3 stories for you. Each are more disturbing than the last. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. These tales aren't for the faint of heart. Some true crime cases are so bizarre that they blur the line between fact and fiction. In this video, we're uncovering 3 of the most unsettling stories in criminal history. First, we have the tale of a failed outlaw whose body travelled the country as a carnival attraction long after he died. Then we have a twisted love story about a man who lived with his lover's corpse for years, treating it like a life-size doll. And then finally we have the chilling account of a man known as the Doll Maker, whose obsession with death led him to transform the bodies of the dead into something unthinkable. These are the haunting stories of Elmer McCurdy, Carl Tanzler, and Anatoly Moskvin, and they're a chilling reminder that for some, death is only the beginning. So grab a drink, draw the curtains, and prepare to be on the edge of your seats for today's stories of crime, misfortune, and embalmed corpses like you've never heard before. The story of Elmer McCurdy, an American outlaw, is remarkable not only for his exploits in life, but also for the bizarre adventures that followed his death. Elmer J. McCurdy was born on January 1st, 1880 in Washington. His mother, Sadie McCurdy, was just 17 years old and unmarried at the time. The identity of Elmer's father remains uncertain, though one likely candidate was Sadie's cousin, Charles Smith, a name Elmer would later adopt as one of his many aliases. To avoid the stigma of unwed motherhood, Sadie's brother George and his wife Helen adopted Elmer, raising him as their own. However, tragedy struck when Elmer was just 10 years old and George died of tuberculosis. Following his death, Sadie and Helen moved with Elmer to Bangor, Maine. It was there that Sadie finally revealed the truth about his parentage. This revelation deeply affected Elmer, and he grew increasingly rebellious. In his teenage years, he began drinking heavily, a habit that would plague him for the rest of his life as he battled chronic alcoholism. Despite this rocky start, things started to briefly look up for McCurdy when he moved in with his grandfather and found work as an apprentice plumber. For a short while, he lived a relatively stable life until the economic downturn of 1898 cost him his job. Then in 1900, he lost both his mother and grandfather within just 2 months. His mother Sadie died from a ruptured ulcer and his grandfather succumbed to kidney disease. Down on his luck and grieving, McCurdy left Maine in search for a fresh start. He travelled around the eastern United States working as a plumber and a lead miner. However, his worsening alcoholism made it hard for him to hold down steady work. At some point during 1905, while living in Iola, Kansas, he was arrested for public intoxication. In 1907, McCurdy joined the US Army and was stationed at Fort Leavenworth. He was trained with nitroglycerin for demolition work and learned to operate a machine gun. He was honourably discharged from the Quartermaster Corps on November 7th, 1910. So let's dive into some of McCurdy's criminal escapades, shall we? Many of which are so bizarre and messy they sound more like scenes from a slapstick comedy movie than real-life crimes. After leaving the army, McCurdy reconnected with a fellow soldier in St. Joseph, Kansas, and the two launched into a life of crime. But McCurdy was no criminal mastermind. On November 19th, 1911, he and his partner were arrested after being caught with burglary tools. Some of these tools were chisels, hacksaws, nitroglycerin funnels, gunpowder, and money sacks. Astonishingly, McCurdy was found not guilty and released the next day. Free again, McCurdy set out to continue his robbery career, although with limited success. He often relied on his army demolition training, but routinely misjudged the amount of nitroglycerin required, resulting in disastrous outcomes. One such failure occurred in March 1911, when McCurdy and 3 accomplices tried to rob Iron Mountain, Missouri Pacific Train No. 104 in Lenape, Oklahoma. They believed a safe aboard held $4,000. Though they managed to stop the train, McCurdy used far too much nitroglycerin. The safe and most of the money inside was completely destroyed in the blast. The gang escaped with only $100 to $500 in melted and fused coins. In September that year, McCurdy and 2 others attempted a bank robbery in Chautauqua, Kansas. After 2 hours hammering through a wall, they reached the vault and placed a nitroglycerin charge, but it failed to ignite. The lookout panicked and fled, and McCurdy and his partners escaped with a mere $150 in loose coins. Disheartened, McCurdy spent the following few weeks drinking heavily while staying in a hay shed on a friend's property near Bartlesville, Oklahoma. His final heist took place on October 4th, 1911, near Okessa, Oklahoma. The target was a Katy train, reportedly carrying $400,000 in royalty payments for the Osage Nation, but McCurdy mistakenly stopped the wrong train. It was a passenger train. He and his partners made off with just $46 from a mail clerk, a revolver, some whiskey, a coat, and a conductor's watch. A local newspaper described the heist as one of the smallest in the history of train robberies. On October 6th, McCurdy returned to the hay shed, ill with tuberculosis, pneumonia, and trichinosis. He drank with ranch hands that night, unaware he'd been identified as a suspect in the train robbery. A $2,000 reward had been issued, and sheriffs Bob and Stringer Fenton, along with Dick Wallace, tracked him using bloodhounds. At dawn, the posse surrounded the hay shed, and when McCurdy emerged, he allegedly fired first. A gunfight broke out, ending with McCurdy being shot in the chest, though it remains unknown which officer fired the fatal shot. McCurdy's body was taken to an undertaker in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where undertaker and owner of the business, Joseph L. Johnson, embalmed the corpse using arsenic and prepared it for burial. But when no relatives came forward to claim the body and no payment was made, Johnson refused to bury him. Instead, he turned the body into some sort of sideshow attraction. Dressed in street clothes and holding a rifle, McCurdy stood in the corner of the funeral home as the bandit who wouldn't give up. Visitors paid a nickel to see him. Johnson gave him other nicknames like the Embalmed Bandit and the Oklahoma Outlaw. For 5 years, McCurdy remained a local curiosity, until October 6, 1916, 2 men arrived claiming to be his long-lost brothers. With permission from the sheriff and the local attorney, Johnson released the body to them. In reality, the men were carnival promoters, brothers James and Charles Patterson. They brought the corpse to Arkansas City, Kansas, and made him a star attraction in their traveling show. McCurdy toured the country for decades, until 1922 when James Patterson sold the operation to Louis Sonny, who added McCurdy to his traveling museum of crime. Sonny's museum featured wax replicas of infamous outlaws, including figures like Bill Doolin and Jesse James. Now with the addition of Elmer McCurdy's embalmed body, now known as the Embalmed Bandit, Sonny had a truly unique centerpiece for his exhibit. In 1928, the corpse became part of the official sideshow that accompanied the Trans-American Foot Race. And after a few years, in 1933, Sonny loaned the body to filmmaker Dwayne Esper, who used it to promote his exploitation film Narcotic. Afterward, the mummified remains were displayed in theatre lobbies as a grim curiosity dubbed the Dead Dope Fiend, with Esper claiming the man had died in a shootout with police after robbing a drugstore. By this point, McCurdy's body had become severely mummified, his skin dried and shriveled, causing the corpse to shrink in size. When Sonny died in 1949, the body was placed in storage in a Los Angeles warehouse, where it remained until 1968. That year, Sonny's son Dan loaned it to filmmaker David F. Friedman, who briefly featured the mummy in his film She-Freak. Later that year, Dan sold the corpse, along with the rest of the wax figures he inherited, to Sonny Singh, owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum, for $10,000. Singh had purchased them on behalf of 2 Canadian entrepreneurs, planning a roadside exhibit near Mount Rushmore. During one of the outdoor shows, a violent windstorm damaged McCurdy's corpse even further. The body lost several fingers and toes, as well as parts of its ears. Concerned that the figure now looked too gruesome and no longer lifelike, they deemed it unsuitable for display and returned it to Singh. Singh then sold the body to Ed Leach, co-owner of the Pike, an amusement park in Long Beach, California. In 1976, McCurdy's remains were briefly suspended in the Laugh-in-the-Dark funhouse, hanging as a macabre attraction for unsuspecting visitors. Not long after this, on December 8, 1976, the production crew for the science fiction adventure television series The $6 Million Man began filming scenes at the Pike for an episode of the show called Carnival of Spies. On one of these days, a prop master tried to move what he thought was a mannequin, and he pulled the arm, but it snapped off completely, revealing bone and tissue. Police were alerted and the body was sent for an autopsy. Dr. Joseph Choi confirmed that the corpse was in fact a human who had sustained a gunshot wound to the chest prior to his death. Traces of arsenic in the tissues dated the embalming to the early 20th century. A 1924 penny and old ticket stubs in the corpse's mouth, along with autopsy scars and preserved skeletal features, helped forensic experts, including Dr. Clyde Snow, positively identify the body as that of Elmer McCurdy. News of this discovery spread rapidly. Though several funeral homes offered to bury him, officials waited in case a relative eventually came forward, but nobody ever did. Finally, on April the 22nd, 1977, Elmer McCurdy was laid to rest in the Boot Hill section of Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma, next to the fellow outlaw Bill Doolan. To ensure he wouldn't be disturbed again, 2 feet of concrete was poured over the casket. At last, after nearly 66 years of posthumous fame, Elmer McCurdy was truly at rest. Karl Tanzler, also known as Count Karl von Kossel, was born on February 8, 1877 in Dresden, Germany. During his childhood, Tanzler claims to have been visited by visions of a dead ancestor, Countess Anna Constantia von Kossel, who revealed to him the face of his destined true love, an exotic dark-haired woman. He would later have the same visions again, briefly, in his adult life. Around 1920, Tanzler married Doris Schaefer, and together they had 2 daughters, Aisha, born in 1922, and Clarissa, born in 1924. In 1926, Tanzler emigrated from Germany to the United States, and his wife and daughters joined him shortly thereafter. A year later, he began working as a radiology technologist at the Marine Hospital Service in Key West, Florida, adopting the name Count Karl von Kossel. It was here, on April the 22nd in 1930, that he met Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, who had been brought in by her mother for medical examination. Maria was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a devastating disease caused by bacteria that ultimately claimed her life, as well as the lives of many of her close relatives. Upon seeing Maria, Tanzler immediately recognized her as the dark-haired beauty he had seen in his visions. Maria, a Cuban-American woman, was known for her striking beauty and was regarded as the local belle of Key West. She was the daughter of Aurora Milagro and Francisco Hoyos. In addition to Maria, the couple had 2 daughters, Florinda and Celia. In February 1926, Maria married a man named Louis Messer, but after she suffered a miscarriage, Messer left her and relocated to Miami. Despite their separation, Maria remained legally married to Messer until her death. While treating Maria for tuberculosis, Tanzler was determined to find a way to save her life, resorting to every treatment he could think of. He brought medical equipment, including X-rays, to Maria's parents' home. This is where she was staying to receive care. During this time, he also lavished Maria with extravagant gifts like fine clothing and jewellery. It is said that during these visits, Tanzler confessed his deep, undying love for Maria. However, I must say, I could not find any evidence to suggest that Maria ever reciprocated his feelings. Despite his best efforts, Maria's condition worsened, and in 1931 she tragically passed away from tuberculosis at the age of 22. At the time of her death, Maria's mother, Aurora, didn't appear to hold any ill will towards Tanzler. In fact, she gave him a lock of Maria's hair to remember her by, perhaps as a token of gratitude for his unwavering care and devotion to her daughter. It's possible that Aurora took comfort in the fact that Tanzler had done all he could to try and save her daughter's life. After her death, Tanzler paid for Maria's funeral, and with permission from her family, he arranged for the construction of a mausoleum above her grave in Key West Cemetery. Tanzler visited her resting place almost every night, sitting by the grave and singing Spanish songs to her. He even claimed that Maria's spirit would visit him, asking him to take her away from the grave. Then, in 1933, Tanzler decided to do exactly that. One night, he crept through the cemetery and stole Maria's body, transporting it home on a toy wagon. In the confines of his home, Tanzler went to extreme lengths to preserve Maria's body. He used piano wires to attach her bones together and replaced her eyes with glass eyeballs. To hide decomposition, he coated her skin with silk fabric soaked in wax and plaster of Paris. He stuffed her abdominal and chest cavities with rags to maintain the shape of her body. As time passed, her hair began to fall out, so Tanzler created a wig using the air Maria's mother had previously given him. To mask the smell of the decay, Tanzler drenched her body with copious amounts of perfumes, disinfectants, and preserving chemicals. He dressed her in stockings and jewellery and gloves, and kept her in his bed for most of the time. Whilst there is no definite evidence to suggest that Tanzler engaged in other, more intimate acts with the corpse, if you know what I mean, rumours have circulated about the presence of a tube found in Maria's body. These details sparked a great deal of speculation, though it remains unclear whether the rumours were substantiated. Based on my research, no solid evidence has surfaced to confirm this aspect of this case. By October 1940, Tanzler had been living with Maria's body for over 7 years when he was confronted at his home by her sister Florinda after she had heard disturbing rumours that Tanzler was living with her sister's corpse. Shortly after this confrontation, Tanzler was seen dancing with Maria's corpse in the front of an open window, which then led to his arrest. During a psychiatric evaluation, Tanzler was deemed mentally competent to stand trial. He was charged with wantonly and maliciously destroying a grave and removing a body without authorization. However, due to the expiration of the statute of limitations, the case was dropped later that year and Tanzler was released without facing legal consequences. Following Carl Tanzler's arrest and the shocking discovery of Maria's corpse in his home, authorities transferred her body to physicians and pathologists for examination. After their analysis, the remains were placed on public display at the Dean Lopez Funeral Home, where an estimated 6,800 people came to view the mummified corpse. Eventually, Maria's body was returned to the Key West Cemetery, this time buried in an unmarked grave at a secret location to prevent further disturbances. It has been alleged that before this second burial, her remains were dismembered and sealed inside a metal box, though this detail remains unconfirmed. So now you might expect that the public's opinion of Carl Tanzler would be one that's not so great, but shockingly, most of the public expressed sympathy towards him, viewing him less as a criminal and more as a heartbroken, eccentric romantic. After losing access to Maria's actual remains, Tanzler created a life-size effigy of her using a death mask and lived with this until his death. Tanzler passed away on July 3rd, 1952 at the age of 75. His body was found 3 weeks later, lying on the floor of his home. This suggests to me that he had become increasingly isolated in his later years. Anatoly Moskvin was born in the city of Gorky in Soviet Russia on the 1st of September 1966 to parents Elvira Moskvina and Yuri Moskvin. It is said that he had a fondness of visiting cemeteries as a child and had a huge intrigue in the afterlife. Moskvin was well known in academic circles, and many of his peers have described him as a genius and an eccentric, and said that he loved to read. It is reported he owned over 60,000 books. He graduated from the Philological Faculty of Moscow State University, with his main interests being Celtic history and folklore, as well as languages and linguistics. After graduating, he went on to work as a lecturer in Celtic studies at Nizhny Novgorod University. He is a philologist, linguistic and polyglot and speaks 13 languages, and has also written several books and papers and translations. He has occasionally worked as a journalist and would write articles regularly for Necrologies, a weekly newspaper that publishes obituaries and information on cemeteries and sometimes writes about famous dead people. He is considered to be an expert on local cemeteries in Nizhny Novgorod Oblast, and during 2008 he wrote an extensive series of articles on the history on these cemeteries that appeared in the paper. Moskvin led a very isolated life and never dated or married until 2016, where it has been reported that he planned to marry a 25-year-old native from his own town. This person also attended his trial later on. It's said that he preferred to live at home with his parents rather than starting a family of his own, though he has said he feels regret for not having his own children and even tried to adopt a child but was denied. As a child, Moskvin spent a lot of his time with friends, roaming graveyards, and even had a favourite one, the Krasnaya Etna Cemetery in the city Leninsky district. Moskvin has claimed that as a child he witnessed the funeral of an 11-year-old girl he did not know, and he claims that her family members attending the funeral made him kiss the deceased girl's face, even forcing his head towards her with no way of getting out of it. He describes kissing the waxy skin of her forehead as he kissed her. As he spent a lot of time in his childhood as well as adult life in cemeteries, I think it's safe to say Moskvin seems to have quite an obsession with cemeteries and death, even making a career out of his obsession. His main fascinations were of cemeteries, burial rituals, death, and the occult. Being an expert in Celtic culture, he learned how the ancient Druids would sleep on the graves of their deceased loved ones so that they could communicate with their spirits. He also studied the culture of the peoples of Siberia, mainly the ancient Yakuts, and he came to learn how they too had similar practices to the ancient Druids in order to speak with the dead. In 2005, Oleg Ryabov, a publisher, commissioned Moskvin to summarize and list the dead in more than 700 cemeteries of 40 regions of Nizhny Novgorod Oblast. Moskvin claims that for 2 years he spent working at these cemeteries. He would walk for miles and miles every day, and sometimes he would even drink from puddles and spend nights in haystacks and abandoned farms. He also claims that once he spent the night in a coffin that was being prepared for a funeral. On the odd occasion, Moskvin would be questioned by police, who were suspicious of him for hanging around the graveyards so often, and they had received reports of vandalism and theft in the cemeteries. Though Moskvin was never arrested once he would mention his academic credentials and explain he was there for research purposes. The work that Moskvin did for the publisher during this time still remains unpublished, but has been described as unique and priceless by Alexei Yezin, the editor of Necrologies, the weekly paper that Moskvin was often a contributor to. When Moskvin's 6 secrets would emerge later on and he would be arrested, Yezmin would say that he was confident there had been a mistake and that Moskvin was going to be exonerated. Later on, Yezin would then go on to tell Associated Press, an American non-profit newsagent, that Moskvin was a loner who had certain quirks, but that gave no indications that he was up to anything unusual. Now let's get into what Moskvin was really up to in his spare time, shall we? Because if you think sleeping in coffins wasn't strange enough, well, let me tell you, it gets a lot stranger from here. On November 2nd, 2011, police arrested Moskvin after they had been investigating a spate of desecrations in cemeteries in and around Nizhny Novgorod, when their investigation led them to him. After Moskvin's arrest, investigators from the Center of Combating Extremism searched his home where he lived with his parents and found more than they had anticipated. His bedroom was filled with clutter and books all strewn around, and amongst all the mess were what looked to be dolls. Rather strange, life-size dolls. But these were not dolls. They were in fact the corpses of 29 young girls. The bodies were found in his home and in his garage. Most of them were on the floor or seated on shelves and sofas. In some instances, Moskvin had taken music boxes and inserted them into the corpse's chest cavity so that they would play music when the bodies were moved. Police found only 29 corpses at Moskvin's flat. However, he is suspected of desecrating as many as 150 graves in total, after police also found many grave nameplates that had been removed from headstones. They also discovered instructions for making these dolls, along with maps of cemeteries in the area and a collection of videos and photos depicting open graves and disinterred bodies, though none conclusively proved to be connected to the bodies found in the flat. Most of the corpses had been stolen from cemeteries in Nizhny, but some came from as far as Moscow. Throughout the investigation, Moskvin willingly cooperated with police. However, he showed a lack of remorse to the victims' families, stating that, "You abandoned your girls in the cold, and I brought them home and warmed them up." He told the investigators that he had been making the corpses into dolls over the span of 10 years. He said that he was lonely as his parents went away for most of the time, leaving him alone, and this is also how he managed to get away with his macabre acts, without them ever becoming suspicious. Once learning the truth, his parents claimed that they always believed the doll making was just a hobby of Moskvin's, and they didn't think anything of it. This is very strange given the fact that there was a grotesque smell emanating from Moskvin's bedroom and the garage when the police investigated. Moskvin was ultimately charged under the Article 244 of the Criminal Code for the desecration of graves and dead bodies, a charge which carries up to 5 years in prison if found guilty. After undergoing a psychiatric evaluation, Moskvin was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. On May 25, 2012, the Leninsky district of Nizhny Novgorod deemed Moskvin unfit to stand trial, and so he was released from criminal liability. Instead, Moskvin was sentenced to coercive medical measures and was sent to a psychiatric clinic, with his stay there to be reviewed regularly. In February 2013, a hearing approved an extension of his treatment. This was then extended again in 2014, and yet again in 2015. By 2018, his doctor stated that he was no longer dangerous and petitioned the court to release him for outpatient treatment instead. But in 2019, a subsequent psychiatric evaluation found that it was too soon to release Moskvin, and so the hospital withdrew their petition. In an interview after his arrest, Moskvin said that he felt deep sympathy for dead children and that one day they could be brought back to life, either with science or black magic. Moskvin described how he would come to choose his victims by looking through obituaries or recently deceased children until he found one that he felt spoke out to him. He would then locate their grave where he would sleep in order to find the spirit of the child and ask if they wanted to be brought back to life. The disturbed grave robber did this for 20 years, insisting he would not dig up a grave if the child's spirit did not give him permission beforehand. As Moskvin got older, it became more and more uncomfortable for him to sleep on the graves, so he started to bring the corpses home with him, where he would sleep next to them each night. He said he knew the spirits would feel more relaxed in his home and would be more willing to communicate with him. He also says their spirits were a lot clearer to hear once they were no longer underground. Moskvin researched the mummification process and learned techniques to try and preserve the dead bodies. He would dry the corpses using salt and baking soda, and then store and hide them in a secure, dry place in the cemetery. Once dried, he would then carry them to his home, where he tried different methods to make dolls out of them, in an attempt to give the children more functional bodies that they could use once he found a way to bring them back to life. He said he did not think the children would be happy in their natural physical state, as their remains had become too decayed and ugly, and he wanted them to be happy. Over time, the bodies would eventually wither and shrink as they dried. He would then wrap the limbs and the corpses in cloth and stuff the body cavity with rags and padding. Sometimes he would add wax masks that he painted using nail polish, and he would place these over their faces. He would then dress them in clothes and put wigs on them. Moskvin says he was aware that he was committing a criminal act each time he stole a corpse, but he said that he believed that rescuing the children was far more important than obeying the law. The police believe that there was no sexual motive behind Moskvin's crimes, stating that he loathed the idea of sex. Moskvin says that he never had any sexual attraction to the dolls and that he considered them to be his own children. Moskvin would speak and interact with the corpses as though they were alive, and would even hold birthday parties for them each year. One of Moskvin's victims was Olga Chardimova, who was followed and murdered by a drug addict after she pleaded with her parents to allow her to walk alone for the first time to her grandma's in the next block of flats. Unbeknownst to her, her attacker was hanging around the lobby of the block of flats, waiting for his opportunity to rob somebody, when all of a sudden he spotted Olga walking alone. Here he had his perfect opportunity. He tried to rob Olga's earrings, but because she tried to escape, he then panicked and lashed out and hit her over the head with an iron bar. He then hid her remains behind pipes in the block's attic, where they were discovered 5 months later. Olga's mum, Natalia, made a statement about Moskvin, saying, "I still find it hard to grasp the scale of his sickening work, but for 9 years he was living with my mummified daughter in his bedroom. I had her for 10 years, he had her for 9. So that's going to be it for this video, but I hope you enjoyed it. Please comment below, let me know what you thought of these stories. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, where I plan to upload videos just like this one all the time. So thanks again for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.